Okay, greetings everybody. This video I'm wanting to just show you some basic HTML and CSS properties and how they work using the interactive w3schools.com functionality to do things on one side of the screen and then watch them show up on the other side. So I'm taking advantage of the wonderful resource that is there at w3schools.com. It's a group. I just clicked the About page for the first time today. I've used their website for many years, and it's evidently a group based in Norway, and they offer some certificates on their website. But what I have used it for and been so impressed by is their sort of comprehensive CSS resources in particular, and this interactive, they call it their Try It editor on their website, which is really cool. Okay, so what I want to show you here is on the left-hand side of the screen, you see a very, very simple web page. So we have our doc type statement up at the top, then we have our opening, and down at the bottom are closing HTML tags. That basically tells the browser just apply the latest version of HTML, currently HTML5 officially, to interpret the content on this page. Then we have an opening and a closing head tag and an opening and a closing body tag. The head and the body tags are the two primary sections of any web page. And as of HTML5, they're optional. The browsers will all render the page correctly even without them, but you should always include them. It's good for semantic purposes. It's good for SEO and legacy purposes. The opening body tag should always immediately follow the closing head tag, just as you see here. And the head section is for setting up a lot of important things that are not visible on the page, like links to your CSS and your JavaScript files, establishing a little fave icon and a title for the page. Those actually do show up, but only in the browser tab up at the very top of the screen. And various other things like meta tags for search purposes, which do not show on screen. And then the purpose of the body section is mainly the entire visible content of the page. Okay, and some, related markup that doesn't necessarily show directly. Okay, so you can see what's on the left-hand side of the page, and then over on the right, you see the result. This is my H1 text. H1 is what's called heading, H1, H2, H3, heading tags. And that tells the search engine this is more important, this is a title, and so forth. Okay, so up here in the style section of the head section of the page, we're using what's called embedded styles, which normally you do not use. It's only applicable if you have a one-page website, as we do in this case. Normally we use what's called external CSS styles, which means we link off to one or more CSS files that then control the content across however many pages we have on that website, 50, 100, 200, whatever. Whereas this embedded style up in the head section really only applies on a one-page website, which is usually not the case. But for demonstration purposes, it's convenient. So you can see that I have only one CSS property here, margin top, then a colon, and then the value, and then a semicolon. And what that has done is it's moved this text down a little bit, created that white space. If I change that to 60 and then I click run, we'll see this H1 text move down a little bit. Okay, saw it just move down. Okay, so that's what that does. And then I have my two paragraphs. So HTML and CSS are not sensitive to white space. If you put in extra lines or whatever, they don't really care. They're just reading for significant characters like angle brackets and curly braces, which is common in languages, computer languages today. So let's do something here. Let's say background color, and then let's give it a hex value that will be a shade of gray. I'm just going to put I put CC, 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 semicolon, and then I'm going to click Run. Okay, now notice how it changed the background color. So I'm affecting the CSS up here in the declaration, but then in the display area, it changed how that H1 tag appears on the screen. Okay, now looking at this, I really I want the text to be centered inside there. So let me say text align center. And I can put a space here if you prefer. I'm having trouble seeing my cursor. It's not showing up. It doesn't care if you have a space there or not. Again, it's not sensitive to that or blank lines. Okay, now I'm going to press Run. And what I'm hoping to see is that H1 text get centered in the gray area. Okay, so it did that. Now I want to see more space or padding above and below that text. You see how the gray background is too close to it? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the padding property. And with padding, if I pass only two values, it'll use the first for top and bottom padding and the second value for left and right. So I'm going to say, just arbitrarily, I'm just going to say 16 pixels and then 0. So that says give me 16 pixels top and bottom padding for the H1 tags, but don't bother with the left and right padding. So now I should see some more space over and below that text, above and below. And that worked, okay? I'm going to reduce that a little bit. I'm going to make it 12 pixels. And then I click Run. Okay, great. Now, really, I don't want that gray to extend all the way across the page like it is. I want it to be more sort of limited and centered. So I'm going to say width 80%. And now click Run. And look what it did. It moved that gray area to where it's only occupying 80% of its container. Okay? But I don't want it to all be over at the left margin. Typically, text in browsers will default to left aligned as opposed to center or right aligned. So now I need to get that whole element, and the element is an H1 tag. A lot of work we're going to here just for an H1 tag, to center. So to do that, I'm going to use the margin property. And when you use a auto value, AUTO, for the left and the right margin, for most elements, it will center them within their parent container. So the margin, up here, I've already got margin top at 40. Now, if I'm going to do margin where I set left, right to auto, I can set top margin to 40 at the same time. I'm going to erase that line, margin top. Okay? And what I'm going to do is down here, again, I'm having trouble seeing where my cursor is on the screen. It's not showing up. Is I'm going to include that top value. I'm going to put in 20 pixels for it. Top. Now, if I put in 3 values following the margin property or the padding property, only 3, not 1. I can use 1, 2, or 3 values for margin or for padding. They're really important CSS properties, margin and padding. I can use 1 value or 2 values or 3 or 4. If I use 1 value, it says apply this on all sides, all 4 sides, 1 value. If I use 2, the first is top and bottom, second is left and right. If I use 3, first is top, second is left and right, third is bottom. If I use 4, then we go clockwise, top, right, bottom, left. I'm going to use 3, and I'm going to say auto 0. So what I'm telling it by passing 3 values is 20 for my top margin. That moves my H1 text down like I have it now. Auto is going to then be used for left and right values, and that should center that whole gray H1 area on the page like I want, and then 0 bottom margin. Now I'm going to click run and let's see what happens. And there it did it. It reduced my top margin a little bit because 20 pixels is less than what I had before. But I've still got a top margin. We can see that if I change that to, let's say, 40, I'm going to click run and we'll see the whole thing move down. And notice that when it moves down, it moves everything underneath it as well. It flows down on the page. Okay, so I'm going to move that back up. So that's how, we can do some real slick things here. Okay. Now, what I'd like though on that H1 text is I'd like that gray background area to have rounded corners. You know how you often see that on a page? So what I'm going to do is add a property called border radius. I say border radius, and I'm going to use, I can use anything, 23px. We'll see how that looks, and I'll click run. And there's some nice rounded corners. Cool, huh? Now, what I'd like to have is, I'm going to go ahead and put a dark border around that. So that's the border property itself. And here I'm just going to give it a color of a dark shade of gray. And I'm going to say solid, which means solid line for the border. And I'm going to say 1 pixel width for the border, and click run. And see how that little border just appeared? Pretty cool, huh? Okay, so what we're doing here is we're adjusting the appearance of anything I apply an H1 to. So I could say H1 again, I'm having trouble seeing the cursor on. Okay, so run, and so there it is again, but all I put in is my second H1 section, and it applied all that really attractive styling to it, to that second H1 section, because it's determined up here. And then you can imagine if instead of being embedded only on a single dinky page like this CSS was in an external CSS suffix file, and it's being referenced by 1,000 pages on a website. And you, the webmaster person, web designer, someone on the team, go in and change a single line of code for H1 tags, and across 2,000 pages, everything changes. That's pretty cool, huh? So let me take that back off. Okay. So now we've got, this is my first paragraph, this is my second paragraph. I'm thinking that text looks a little bit small, the paragraph text. So I'd like to have my font be a little bit larger. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the P tag here, and P is a standard HTML tag, as is H1. Okay, it's a standard HTML tag. And what I'm going to say is I'm going to say font size, and I'm going to bump the font size up. By default, it's 100% or 1 EM. I find percent's a little bit easier to use than EM. They do the same thing, but like 0.9 EM would be 90%. 90% is just a little easier to understand. So what I usually use percents. So I'm going to say font size 110%. And remember, we always use, have the curly braces, and we got to have a colon here and a semicolon here. We can't reverse it. We can't use a semicolon there. You know, remember, programming is not horseshoes or hand grenades, as the saying goes. Everything's got to be, I mean, HTML and CSS are among the simpler of computer languages, although CSS is getting pretty substantial, but still they're picky in the same way. You have to do things a certain way. Okay, so what I've done by putting curly braces after the P tag up in my CSS declaration section and then saying font size 110%, that should affect all P tags. And normally paragraph text inside web page is on web pages is inside P tags. I should see my font here get larger. So let's click run and see what happens. Okay, it just got bigger. To make it a little bit more obvious, I'm going to change that to, no, not 310, 130%, and click run, and we'll see the text get substantially larger. Okay, substantially larger. Now, what I'm going to do, that's a little too big. I'm going to go to 120%. That's what that looks like. Now I'm going to space out those letters just a little bit. I want all the text on my website to be just a little spaced out compared to the default. For whatever font you have, you might be using a Google font. This is like a standard Arial font and so forth. So I'm going to use the letter spacing CSS property, and I'm going to say 0.1 EM and click enter or click run. And notice how it spaced that out quite a bit, like more than I want. So 0.1 turned out to be too much. Let's say 0.05 EM. And I click run. We'll see it shrink back some. So let's say that's how I want it. Or let's say I want it 0.03. Okay, so you get the idea. We're styling all of this with CSS, you know, on the fly. Now let me show you just one more thing in this brief video. And I'm going to show you how to create and apply a CSS class. And the use of CSS classes is really ubiquitous on web pages. Okay, it's a little tricky how it's done, but once you get used to it, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, the way you declare a CSS class is wherever you're writing your CSS, which is typically in an external file with the CSS suffix, but here we're doing it in an embedded format because it's a simple one-page demo. You start with a period. I'm going to put that where it belongs. Start with a period. Now I'm going to say Jim's CSS class. Okay, you always need open and closing curly braces. Okay, and once again, CSS and HTML are not sensitive to white space or line break, so however you want to space things is fine. Okay, Jim's CSS class. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this same background color here, CCCC, to only one paragraph as a demo, just a demo of how to apply a CSS class. So I'm going to say, what I'm going to say here is background color, and once again use that shade of light gray. Okay, if I click run, it's not going to do anything because I haven't used that class anywhere. I haven't applied it anywhere on the page. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply that class to this second paragraph. And when I do, then we should see this paragraph get a gray background. And if I can do that, that'll end this demo video because I don't want to make it too long. And it certainly is not going to get any Webby awards for design excellence, but purpose is just to show how to create and then invoke a CSS class. So invoking it and creating it or writing it. Up here we wrote a CSS rule, which happens to be a CSS class. Down here we're going to invoke that CSS rule or CSS class. So what I do is I say p class equals, and then I need quotes. Whenever you create an opening something, it's good to create the closing one at the same time, and then backspace and fill in. And many programming editors like Sublime and Atom and others will automatically kind of, when you start an opening tag, they'll create the closing tag for you. But in any event, I'm going to say Jim's CSS class. Okay, so notice the format's a little different. To create it, we just have a period in front of the class name and then the class definition. To invoke it, we use class equals and the name inside quotes. To, it could be applied to a P, it could be applied to a div, it could be applied to an H1 tag, anything. Okay, now I'm going to press run, and we should see this second paragraph get a gray background. Whee! It worked. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end this video here. And this has just been a basic intro and demo to some simple HTML and CSS functionality.